Hello and welcome once again to my brilliant students. Today we're going to be doing lesson 6 and it's going to be all over archetypes. So in this lesson you will learn about archetypal characters and their role in literature, and you'll also learn how to identify them across multiple works. So previously, we've learned about universal or cultural symbols. You remember whenever we were talking about, say, like the ravens or crows or skulls or roses, how they're symbols of death or love, respectively. Well, that's a great start to understanding archetypes because archetypes are extremely similar to universal symbols. So I want to let you guys know that this is actually a type of literary criticism, which is really advanced stuff. So literary criticism is whenever you comment, you weigh, and you judge a work of literature using all of these different types of methods. This is just one type of method, archetypal criticism. And in this case, we're looking through that lens or through that method, okay? So we're going to be examining those archetypes. We're going to be looking for the cultural symbols. We're going to be looking for the universal symbols, okay? And that is what the idea is behind this type of criticism. So, do you remember whenever we were doing our MBTI assessments, we were doing our own personality assessments? Well, those are all archetypes. So there was this guy, his name was Carl Jung, and he believed, it's Jung, not Jung, okay? So he believed that all of humanity had a collective unconscious. And so there were these things that were universal themes and symbols and characters and stories, and they were infused within every single culture. No matter where you were in the world, it was infused with every single culture, and it's in their origin stories and it's in their mythology. That is what Carl Jung believed. Now, a lot of his theories have been since refined or just flat out disproven, because there's always going to be exceptions to whenever it comes to archetypes. However, there's still something to be said about like the power that can be applied to universal symbols whenever you're seeing it across different cultures. So it's really fascinating stuff, but I do need to let you guys know that it is limited. I can't let you guys go off into some college literary class or even into your senior year thinking that archetypal criticism is like the number one greatest criticism of all time. It's not. It's actually still quite limited, but it can still be really useful whenever you're just getting into literature. So, just like the fact that I said cultural symbols are limited, so too can be archetypes. You can always find an exception, so remember that archetypal criticism is a type of understanding literature. It is not the only type, and it's not even necessarily the best type. It's probably one of the best types for getting into it and getting into criticism, which you guys have not probably done a whole lot of just yet. And so that's why I like using archetypal criticism to introduce it to my students. So today, your assignment is this. You'll be listing out some of the most common archetypes in your notes, and your assignment will be fairly simple. I want you to think of some examples of characters in the movies, the books, shows, etc. that fit into the archetypes of a given description. So, for example, I'll give you the description of the orphan, and I'll tell you what the orphan kind of like what makes that archetype tick, what that character is motivated by, and so on and so forth. And then I want you to think of examples in your notes. Your notes are going to look something like this. They'll have a blank here. We're going to work through all 12 of these together, and then right here there's a space for you to write in your examples. Whether you have a physical copy of that in class, whether you have a physical copy of that in class or whether you have the digital copy here online, both of those will be fine, just as long as you turn that into me and I get to see what some of your examples are, see that you're following along, and see that you're understanding the material, okay? So that is your assignment, okay? So be thinking of those characters that fit into the roles as you listen, and do your best not to just go and copy the same ones that I do, because I will not give you credit for that, okay? So the first one that I want to go over is the caregiver. So this is typically a parent character who cares for the protagonist in some way. This has in the past been called the mother figure, but oftentimes the caregiver is not always a mother, all right? So it can be a father, it can be a father, it can be a mother, it can be Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, it can be Aunt May from Spider-Man, it can be an aunt, it can be a grandparent, just as long as they have a desire to protect and care for the others and they are compassionate and generous, okay? They are motivated by compassion, generosity, and oftentimes they might have to martyr themselves or they might have to sacrifice themselves in some way so that their protagonist's quest so that their protagonist's quest, or so that the people that they care about are able to fulfill their dreams, fulfill their goals, so on and so forth. Okay, the first example that I can think of is the fairy godmother from Cinderella. Motherly figure. She is there. She has these powers, and she has this compassion for Cinderella, and so she's willing to sacrifice herself. She's willing to put herself on the line. She's willing to give of herself for the sake of Cinderella, right? So that is a good example of a caregiver. The next one is the creator. And the creator is some kind of creative and imaginative character. They can be an artist, they can be an inventor, a writer, a musician, and they're generally very innovative, they're very visionary. And so excuse me, they seek to express themselves and their visions and to contribute to the overall culture through valuable creations. The best example I can think of the creator is Remy from Ratatouille. Okay, and I don't want necessarily you guys to think of the creator as like the creator, like capital C creator, like creator of like the heavens and the earth and creator of all things, like on some sort of god level. No. This is someone who has a particular skill, or they have a particular talent, or they have a particular proclivity towards just making something, okay, whatever it might be. And so that's why we have so many possibilities up here: artists, inventors, writers. And I mean, Remy was a cook, but he nevertheless was a creator, wanting to bring his vision to life through his cooking, right? So the next one is going to be the explorer, and the explorer wants to experience new things. They want to be free. They often seek self-discovery through a physical journey, like literally leaving their home and then going out into the wilderness or going out into the city or wherever it might be. And so they are looking for a better, more authentic life, and they're afraid of conforming to the status quo. They're afraid of always just being the same. They're afraid of their growth being stunted. And so they believe that adventure is around every corner. They're bright-eyed, they're bushy-tailed, they're ready to go on that next adventure. And so they can also be seen as these pilgrims, as individualists or wanderers who are kind of blown by the wind from one adventure to another as they go seeking themselves in the adventure that they find themselves caught up in. Best example I can think of this is Rapunzel in Tangled, who ends up eventually escaping from her tower and then going on an adventure herself. She's completely floored. She's completely She's completely awe-inspired by all of the things that she hadn't experienced yet, and by doing so, she discovers more about herself. Okay. The next one is the hero, or it has also been called the warrior, and this is a character who seeks to prove their worth through courageous and heroic acts. So they might be arrogant, and they may fear being seen as weak or scared or not living up to a particular standard, but they want to make the world a better place, and they never want to give up regardless the odds. They are the warrior, the rescuer, the soldier. They're the team player. The one that I think of is not because of his strength in his muscles, but because of the strength of his heart. I think of Hercules in Disney's Hercules as the true hero or the true warrior. He is a team player. He doesn't want to be seen as weak or scared, but it's not necessarily through his strength that he wants to prove himself. It's through his own courage. It's through his own heroism, right? So the next is going to be the innocent. And so the innocent is an optimistic character whose worst fear is doing something bad. They seek to always do the right things, and they have a certain naive innocence about them. They don't seem to understand the harshness of the world, and they are continually stuck in a romantic, dreamy place. I immediately think of Olaf whenever he has his whole solo about summer. He doesn't understand the harshness of summer, and he doesn't understand the harsh realities of the world of what will happen to him. And so I think of him largely as the innocent. He is the one who doesn't only provide comic relief, which he does to some degree, but it's his naivety. Do not eat my papers. No, ma'am, go. So yeah, Olaf does provide that comedic relief. oftentimes, but that's only through his naivety. It's only because he just kind of doesn't get it. Things go over his head. He's innocent. He's naive. He's always in this romantic, dreamy place, and he doesn't understand the difficulties necessarily of this world. The jester is a character who wants to enjoy their life and have a good time, and so they like to joke around and make other people laugh, and they genuinely want to make the world a happier place. They might also be portrayed as a fool, a trickster, a comedian, a prankster, any of those kind of things. The one that I think of is Genie in Aladdin. He isn't really so much a mentor to Aladdin. He does help to guide Aladdin, yes, but for the most part, Genie is there to provide us not just with the comic relief, but also to bring kind of a lightheartedness to the heaviness that is the entire, like whenever you think of the movie Aladdin, it's actually a very heavy movie, right? And if you didn't have that jester, if you didn't have the jokester who was there alongside with you, then it would end up becoming like almost a chore to watch. But that is what the jester's role is to provide the comedy, to provide the lightheartedness, especially whenever there is a heavy or difficult subject. The lover is a loyal companion who fears being unwanted or unloved. So they're passionate, they're committed, but they also desire to be more attractive to others and please everyone at the risk of losing their own identity. So oftentimes they can lose themselves in wanting to please others. So they might be portrayed as a partner, a friend, a spouse. In this case, Tinkerbell is, I would say, Peter Pan's partner in crime. She gets jealous of Wendy whenever Peter begins to give her a little bit more attention. She fears being unwanted. She fears being unloved. And so her jealousy gets her into trouble. She ends up losing herself a little bit through that. Nevertheless, Tinkerbell is a lover. She loves Peter Pan. She loves the Lost Boys. She loves the children, and she loves Neverland, and so she just wants to make sure that she is wanted, okay? And so that is her primary motivation that helps her but also hinders her throughout the movie. The magician is a visionary who understands the way of the world and the way that it works. So juxtapose that or compare that to the innocent who does not understand anything about how the world works, right? They fear accidental negative consequences and they love finding the win-win solutions to problems. However, in their search for knowledge and solutions, they often become manipulative. They might be portrayed as a shaman, a healer, or a charismatic leader, or in this case, a wizard, Merlin in The Sword and the Stone. I want you to think about the magician who fully understands how the world works, and so if therefore they try to manipulate people around them, right, trying to get the best possible outcome, and then oppose that with the innocent like Olaf. Do you ever think that Olaf would try to manipulate you in the way that a magical wizard would? No. But that's also just because he doesn't know how the world works, whereas Merlin does, and so he's trying to get you to fit into the cog or fit into the piece that you're supposed to go, right? And so the magician can be oftentimes portrayed as manipulative. The orphan is a character who wants to belong more than anything. They fear being left out and being alone, and they're often down to earth and empathetic, but they lose their own identity whenever they try to fit in. They are portrayed as the everyman, the guy or girl next door, or the silent majority. The everyman is this is quite possibly one of the archetypes that Carl Jung, whenever he was developing his archetypes, he didn't have the orphan, he called it the everyman, and the reason why he did that is because the thing that Jung assumed is that every man wants to belong, okay? Most people want to belong, and so therefore the orphan oftentimes becomes this avatar for us to look through, and they become our way of looking into the story. Orphans are oftentimes the protagonist in the story, and it doesn't necessarily mean that both of their parents have to be gone. They just have to have suffered some sort of loss. So other guys that like fall into this are characters like Simba, characters like Peter Pan, characters like characters like Oliver in Oliver and Company. Oliver is actually based on Oliver Twist, wherein he is alone on the streets and ends up like surviving on the streets whenever he joins this gang. Oliver in Oliver and Company joins a gang of dogs, right? People who seem completely different than him, but in the end, he ends up finding his own family. Okay, so the orphan oftentimes, even if they do have their own family, will often have a found family that they eventually end up discovering the value of throughout the story. Okay. So, next, that brings us to the rebel. The rebel believes the rules are meant to be broken and wants to change something that isn't working. So, while they may start out with a good goal in mind, they easily cross the line from rebellion into crime, and they're often portrayed as revolutionaries or misfits. Now, you can have a true-hearted rebel, and in this case I picked one out for you. And that's Robin Hood from Disney's Robin Hood. He is a true-hearted rebel, and all of the merry men that are around him, Little John and Friar Tuck and all of the others, they are all part of the rebellion here, and they all have actually very good hearts as far as like what they're wanting to change. Now, does that mean that technically what they're doing is illegal? Yeah, okay, a little bit, but the rules are meant to be broken, especially when the system itself is broken, when the poor are being taxed by the rich, and the rich just keep on getting richer. That is the problem. That's the broken system that Robin Hood wants to change, right? So rebels are becoming more and more popular as protagonists. You find a lot of them. I'm thinking of several just like off the top of my head, and hopefully you can think of several examples off the top of yours as you guys are filling in your notes. The ruler wants to control and wants to create a successful community or society. They fear being overthrown, and as a result, they can become authoritarian or not delegate any roles to the people who are closest to them. They are the boss, they are the king, the queen, they are the politician, they are the role model. They're the ones who are supposed to have all of the answers, and they're the ones who are supposed to keep the order of things. King Triton from The Little Mermaid is a wonderful example of this because he fears not just Ariel moving to the surface and breaking the status quo. He's befuddled, he's confused by her fascination with the surface, whenever really all you need is down here. Your family is here, your society, your community is here, right? And not to mention, he fears being overthrown by Ursula. And so he ends up becoming authoritarian with probably his closest daughters, if not his closest daughter, Ariel, as he tries to make sure that the status quo doesn't change and that he has his successful in community and or society. Of course, we know how that turns out. Lots of musical numbers about the desire to go dancing on land and figuring out what a fork is, and almost frying up both of your best friends in a cooking pot because of a French chef. Anyways. The last one that we're going to just talk about is the sage, also called the mentor. And this is a truth seeker who uses their intelligence to analyze the world. They fear ignorance, and they spend lots of their time studying and self-reflecting. And because they fear ignorance, or because they fear being incapable, they may only study and they never act on what they discover. Okay? Usually what their primary role in is... Their primary role is to impart some sort of knowledge, some sort of skill, some sort of wisdom to the protagonist without ever having done anything themselves, okay? So Phil doesn't fight himself. Phil doesn't punch and kick and go on heroic adventures himself. Phil trains Hercules, okay? So he is the scholar, the philosopher, the academic, but in this case, he is his teacher, okay? And that is the role of a sage or a mentor. Oftentimes, they get relegated out to the periphery, which is kind of like outside of the center of the story, because they're just trying to infuse within the protagonist whatever it is they need in order to advance their goals or advance the conflict, okay? So I will tell you this, and this is whenever we begin merging archetypes and begin understanding the limitations. But whenever you begin to merge an archetype, that's whenever a character doesn't have to fit neatly into one category, okay? So a creator can also be a sage, a ruler can be a sage. You can create compelling, complex characters, even archetypal characters, but it requires you to buck against the status quo and create new combinations of characteristics, habits, and backstory. So by combining major archetypes, you can create round, dynamic characters who propel the plot forward without necessarily becoming cliche, okay? That's the thing that you're wanting to avoid. Like, okay, well, obviously this is the mentor character, so they're just going to do this. They're not going to go beyond that role or that parameter. And it's like, well, that's not really how life works, is it? So even whenever we were talking about your own personal MBTIs, right? Whether you were the architect or the logician, or whether you were the entertainer, or whether you were the mediator, or whatever it might be, you weren't necessarily fitting into those things exactly, right? There were things that you agreed with and said, oh, yeah, that's me to a T. And then there were things that you disagreed with and said, no, that doesn't quite hit the mark. I can see where they're coming from, but it doesn't quite hit the mark there. So instead of having archetypes like this, where you just have boom, sage, boom, hero, boom, the innocent, right? And they all just fit neatly into their little boxes, and they all fit neatly into their little distinctions. More often than not, especially if you have a good, round, compelling character, it's going to look more like this. You'll have a sage, but in addition, you'll have parts of the magician and the ruler that will overlap into that, right? You'll have a hero, but the hero will mostly be an explorer, perhaps, with a little bit of rebel thrown in there, right? You might have an innocent who on one side is a caregiver, but on the other side is an orphan, and so while they're trying to take care of everyone else, they're also afraid of not belonging, right? Even as they're trying to navigate a world that they don't understand. You see how that works? So archetypes and roles will oftentimes overlap, and it will not necessarily look like the neat little boxes, right? So I just want to say congratulations, you did it, well done. And if you study this, and if you go over this and give me some examples, and then really begin to kind of just apply a few thoughts like, oh, I remember this movie, and I would say that person fits into the ruler, or this character fits into the warrior, or this character fits into the mentor, then you really do, you're there. You're at the point of understanding archetypes, and you can begin to develop your own. So well done to you, my brilliant students, and I hope you have a wonderful day.